Hello, I'm Lance, and I'm back with another little story about the Beatles, but this time it's about the fifth Beatle.
May we have his name, please?
Their manager's name is Mr. Brian Epstein.
Brian Epstein?
Brian who? Whatever his name, we're talking about the legendary manager of the Beatles. But maybe the simple title, manager, sells him short. He was much more than that. He was a behind-the-scenes leader who, in many ways, was responsible for the band becoming legends themselves. As Paul McCartney said,
"If anyone was the fifth Beatle, it was Brian."
So how we pronounce his name is important. Maybe it's less important than something like ending world hunger. But as any student of history knows, the details do matter. Getting the little things wrong calls into question how well someone knows the big stuff. So when it comes to the research and care that I put into my videos here on the FabFourArchivist channel, I want to get it right, even if it's unconventional. And I call this man Brian Epstein. That's drawn some attention from viewers of other videos that I've made. And that's understandable. Haven't we heard other people, like those who knew him, say Ep-stine?
Brian was a beautiful guy, Brian Epstein, and
if that's not enough, maybe how in English we say its linguistic cousin can shed some light on things. Albert Einstein. It's not like anyone is calling this guy Albert Einstein. I used to say Brian Epstein. That's how I'd always heard it in my head. That's how I had read it. And then when I heard the four Beatles and other insiders say it, I went with it. But I heard something a while back that changed my mind. I listened to a convincing interview with this man on one of my favorite Beatles podcasts, Fab4 Free-for-All. So I asked him to chat with me about the Beatles manager. I know this is going to be ironic because we're talking about Brian. Let's pronounce your name the right way. Is it Vivek?
Not ironic at all. It is Vivek.
Okay.
It is Vivek, and in fact, we'll probably talk about that too. It's a good. My name is a good example of the Brian Epstein story.
You know that saying that goes, "This person wrote the book on something"? Well, Vivek Tiwary literally wrote the most recent book on Brian Epstein.
So I'm Vivek Tiwary. I'm the author of The Fifth Beatle, The Brian Epstein Story, which is a graphic novel and forthcoming television event series. The book is being adapted into a TV series based on the life of Brian Epstein.
Vivek and I chatted for nearly an hour about the life of Brian, and I learned more about him than I ever expected to know. Vivek is a bona fide expert on Epstein, and so when he says something about the man, I trust him. I know he did his homework on the fifth Beatle. He interviewed and befriended people that knew Brian. Names like Billy J. Kramer and Sid Bernstein should ring a bell for a lot of Beatles fans. But in his research, Vivek went beyond business associates, because like I said earlier, there was a lot more to Brian than his work title. So how does Brian's family pronounce their own last name? A quick creative note, I'm choosing not to edit this section into 3-second sound bites. I respect the story being told here, and I think context is key.
I went to what I consider the source, which is the family. Brian Epstein's family says Epstein. That is the way the family pronounced their name. And the source that I would quote is Brian's mom. Brian's mother says the correct way to pronounce my family's name is Epstein. And the fact that everybody called my son Ep-stine, they said it wrong. So if everyone, including the Beatles and Billy J. Kramer, were saying his name incorrectly, does that all of a sudden make it correct? I would say no. I would say the correct way to pronounce one's family name is how one's family says it. And, I spoke to Joanne Epstein, who is Brian's niece, and, knew her grandmother very, very well. And she told me that, her grandmother was very insistent and a little annoyed that people would be saying the name incorrectly. The correct way to say it is Ep-stine. And so that's how I have dedicated myself to saying it. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because the truth is, I consider myself an expert on the life of Brian Epstein. And, and I'll talk about this, and there'll be a number of people who will immediately, especially in the days of social media and trolls, will be like, this guy's an idiot. He's not even saying the guy's name right.
Right.
And the truth is well, actually, I'm not an idiot, and I'm one of the few people who is saying it correctly. The fact that John Lennon has a song that, in the demos that say, "What about Brian Epstein?" That doesn't make the pronunciation correct. It just doesn't. Right. And I love John. I'm a huge John Lennon fan. But John Lennon's was wrong. There, have I committed Beatles blasphemy by saying John Lennon was wrong? But he was wrong. John Lennon called his manager Brian Epstein, and he was wrong.
What about Brian Epstein and his brother Sam?
With this established, it almost begs the question, why didn't Brian correct others?
Brian Epstein, the man who built the Beatles into a cult,
is now as well known as they are. Well, you've certainly produced a setup full of noise. Brian Epstein, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Of course, we don't know, and we can't ask because Brian unfortunately passed away in 1967. But I asked Tiwary for his thoughts, considering his extensive knowledge.
You know, Brian lived in a different time. You know, as I said earlier, he lived at a time where it was against the law to be gay, and he was gay. He lived at a time of pervasive anti-Semitism, and he was Jewish. He lived at a time where, specifically to his business, Jews did not work extensively in the music business, especially not in the United Kingdom. He wasn't the only one, but the business wasn't run by Jewish people. You know, it was run by people like Sir Joseph Lockwood, white Christian knights of the British Empire. You know, I mean, that has largely changed. If you follow the music industry, you know, there's many powerful Jewish executives in the business, but that just wasn't the case back then. So in large part, it would depend on who Brian was talking to. You know, the last thing that he would want to do is draw attention to his name. So when he's sitting in these meetings or on the telephone doing his job as a manager, and the first thing he hears from the person across the table is like, well, Mr. Epstein, tell me about your band. Like, he's not going to start by saying, well, actually, the correct way to pronounce my name is Ep-steen. And while I'm at it, maybe I'm insulting you. And maybe I'm also drawing attention to the fact that I'm Jewish and it's a period of intense anti-Semitism. Right? That wouldn't make any business sense. The correct thing to do is move on, is to forget about the fact that somebody just mispronounced his name and move on to the business at hand.
So, no, there's no footage of Brian correcting anyone. I would love to have some film of something like Brian introducing himself at a press conference, but there's nothing in my archives. Perhaps it's out there, hidden at the beginning of an old film reel. If you can come up with something, give me a shout in the comments below or on the FabFourArchivist Facebook page. So there we have it. It's Ep-steen, not Ep-stine. If you'd like even another source, how about Brian's autobiography? While putting together this video, I noticed that in my copy of Brian's book, A Cellar Full of Noise, at least my copy from the late 90s, there's a footnote from Beatles historian Martin Lewis. It says, Brian made clear that he preferred Ep-steen rhyme with teen, not with fine. I'll let Mr. Tiwary have the final say.
A last name is a statement of family. And if a last name is a statement of family, and the family says the name is pronounced Ep-steen, then it should follow by simple logic that the name is pronounced Ep-steen. And I would say that is not up for debate. And I don't care what any Beatles historian or what any video footage you show me would suggest otherwise.
A big thank you to Vivek Tiwary for his time. If you want to check out his involvement with all things Brian Epstein, there are links in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and do subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos like this. Beyond the book, Vivek's got some other fun things in the works on the Brian Epstein story. So I'll close the video with some news from him on that project. Let's talk about your current projects and what you're working on, Vivek. It's absolutely fascinating to me that the story of the Beatles manager has become a really cool graphic novel. And it's got a life beyond that, though. This is going somewhere else. Can you fill me in on what's happening there?
Yeah, it does indeed. So we are adapting it for television. We're turning it into a television limited event series, as they say in the TV world. The current plan is 6 to 8 one-hour episodes. It may wind up being more than that, but it's going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 one-hour episodes. And the most exciting piece of news about that is that we have secured access to Beatles music. So we will.
Congratulations! That's rare.
Thank you. No, it is the first and only time to date in history that a non-documentary film about the Beatles has had access to the entire Lennon-McCartney catalog. You see other Beatles movies like Backbeat, Nowhere Boy, etc., and there's no Beatles music in those movies. Right. And so we're very proud that we're going to be able to have Beatles music to tell the Brian Epstein story. My agenda is that I believe, everyone around the world knows who the Beatles are. Everyone around the world should know who Brian Epstein is. And why? Because the Brian Epstein story is inspiring. I think the message of the Brian Epstein story is that no dream is too impossible and no person too unlikely to realize that dream. And that is a message that every human being everywhere around the world should hear. It inspired me to chase my dreams, and I hope that the Brian Epstein story will inspire others to chase their dreams.
All right, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching.
Frankenstein.
You're putting me on.
No, it's pronounced Frankenstein.